42 years ago, 9 friends set out for a simple weekend camping trip in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, and they were never seen again. Search teams scoured the ridges, rivers, and caves, but not a single clue surfaced. For decades, their disappearance became a ghost story whispered around campfires until rangers uncovered something hidden beneath the soil that changed everything. What they found wasn't just evidence. It was a chilling revelation that suggested someone had orchestrated the entire disappearance with terrifying precision. Before we dive into this shocking case, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy true mysteries like this one, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. In the summer of 1981, the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, majestic, endless, and cloaked in mystery, became the backdrop for one of the most haunting disappearances in American history. 9 young campers, all close friends bound by their love for the wilderness, vanished without a trace while exploring remote stretches of the trail. For more than 4 decades, their fate remained a riddle carved into the silence of the mountains. Then, 42 years later, park rangers stumbled upon something so chilling it reignited the case. Tents deliberately buried beneath the soil, sealed away as though someone had tried to erase the very memory of those who once pitched them there. That discovery didn't just reopen old wounds, it tore them wide open, demanding answers the forest had long concealed. The Appalachian landscape has always promised both beauty and peril. Mist rises from the ridges at dawn, and dense forests weave into a labyrinth that can feel otherworldly. For seasoned hikers, it's a place of adventure, but for the unprepared or the unlucky, it can become a place of no return. In that fateful summer, the 9 friends set out from Asheville, carrying supplies for a 3-day excursion. Confident in their skills and experience, they aimed for a remote stretch near Boone, far from the crowded access points. Families expected them back by Sunday evening, yet the silence that followed became unbearable. At first, authorities dismissed it as a missed check-in, but as hours stretched into days, hope was overshadowed by dread. Search teams, rangers, volunteers, even fellow hikers scoured every trail and ravine. They probed caves, traced riverbeds, and scanned every shadow of the forest. Yet nothing surfaced. No tents, no backpacks, not even a footprint. The locals whispered of cursed woods, a stretch where vanishing seemed to echo through generations. Investigators found themselves at a loss. No struggle, no signs of wildlife, no tracks, only absence. The case turned cold, leaving shattered families and a community weighed down by the unknown. The story lingered, retold by campfires as a cautionary tale, until it began to slip into half-forgotten folklore. Then, in 2023, fate intervened. Rangers repairing an old, overgrown trail noticed unnatural mounds of earth. What looked at first like erosion revealed something far darker: entire tents entombed underground, their outlines unmistakable beneath layers of packed soil. Inside, time-worn remnants of the missing campers' belongings lay preserved, as though hidden on purpose. The discovery shattered the silence of 42 years, raising questions more terrifying than answers. Who had buried these shelters? Why conceal them? And could the truth still be unearthed after so much time? Among the vanished were 9 vibrant lives, each with dreams cut short. Jonathan Blake Miller, 24, a meticulous planner and aspiring journalist who documented everything he saw. Rebecca Lynn Hayes, 23, sharp-witted and seasoned on the trail, trusted for her instincts. Samuel Sam Turner, 25, quiet yet dependable, with an uncanny sense of direction. Linda Marie Foster, 22, cheerful, resourceful, and often the peacemaker of the group. Derek Allen Price, 26, bold and adventurous, unafraid of risk. Angela Ruth Warren, 21, creative and deeply observant. Patrick James O'Neill, 24, the group's photographer, eager to capture every memory. Karen Louise Mitchell, 23, compassionate and cautious, a grounding presence. And Michael Edward Shaw, 25, analytical and disciplined, his military background giving the group confidence in survival. Together, they set out expecting only a weekend of laughter and exploration. Instead, they became the central figures in a mystery that continues to haunt the Appalachian trails, their lives suspended in unanswered questions, their story demanding to be told. The disappearance of 9 young campers in the summer of 1981 sent shockwaves through their communities across North Carolina. Families waited for calls, letters, any word at all, but nothing came. As the silence grew heavier, investigators began piecing together the timeline. Witnesses recalled spotting the group as they entered the remote section near Roan Mountain Ridge, a rugged stretch of the Appalachians notorious for testing even the most seasoned hikers. Yet beyond that sighting, it was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. Initial searches revealed no clues, no footprints leading away from the campsite, no broken branches that might suggest a struggle, and no signs of a wildlife attack. Rangers employed dogs and trackers, but even the animals came back with nothing. For 2 relentless weeks, crews combed the wilderness, through ravines, across mist-draped slopes, and into hidden gullies. Yet the group remained lost, leaving behind only questions. The case froze in time, locked away in unsolved tragedy, until 4 decades later, fate delivered an extraordinary revelation. In the summer of 2023, Ranger Emily Carter, then in her mid-30s, was sent to inspect an overgrown section of trail seldom touched in decades. The forest pressed in thick with rhododendron and spruce, its air damp with moss and pine. That was when Emily noticed strange, symmetrical mounds of earth, unnatural formations, too precise to be explained by erosion. Driven by curiosity, she began to dig. Beneath the soil, she unearthed something both astonishing and unsettling, a perfectly preserved tent, sealed underground as if placed there intentionally. One by one, more tents emerged, and the truth sank in. These were the long-lost shelters of the missing 9. Inside, rangers discovered backpacks, sleeping bags, even journals written by the campers, remarkably well preserved. But the most chilling detail was the absence of any human remains. This wasn't a grave site. It was something else entirely. Emily immediately contacted the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and soon forensic teams descended on the site. What they found only deepened the enigma. The tents weren't randomly buried. They were arranged with eerie precision, some tied in unusual ways, others aligned as though marking specific points in the forest. The placement suggested intent, perhaps even ritual, rather than accident. The journals revealed ordinary details, notes about trail conditions, sketches of wildlife, personal musings. None hinted at fear or imminent danger, yet forensic analysis uncovered unsettling anomalies. Soil clinging to backpacks didn't match the surrounding terrain, implying the tents had been buried elsewhere before being relocated. Small scratches on metal tent poles suggested tools had been used, but no human DNA surfaced at first testing. Then locals came forward with unsettling recollections from 1981. One hiker remembered seeing a lone figure shadowing the group near Roan Mountain, a silent observer who kept his distance but lingered unnervingly long. Another recalled a dilapidated cabin, long since collapsed, that locals avoided even as children because of the uneasy feeling it provoked. These vague but consistent accounts painted a haunting picture. Someone may have been watching. Emily's investigation grew increasingly meticulous. She charted the exact positions of each tent, analyzed soil samples against historical weather records, and retraced the likely routes of the campers. The evidence pointed toward one undeniable conclusion. Whoever orchestrated this disappearance possessed an intimate knowledge of the terrain and the psychology of hikers. This was not the work of chance, but of someone who understood how to manipulate the forest itself to conceal unspeakable acts. By mid-2023, the discovery had erupted into national headlines. The chilling combination of preserved tents, soil anomalies, and eyewitness accounts suggested a carefully planned disappearance, hidden beneath the Appalachian earth for over 40 years. Yet, as Emily pressed forward, one question loomed larger than all the rest. Who could have committed such a meticulous act, and why had the truth remained buried for so long? The forest had given up one secret, but many more shadows remained. Emily Carter and her team now carried the weight of unraveling 4 decades of silence, a burden that demanded patience, precision, and intuition. Every recovered item whispered fragments of a forgotten story, a notebook page frayed at the edges with a simple doodle of the mountains, a trail map marked with peculiar symbols, and a charred scrap of cloth hinting at fire. None of these relics alone prove foul play, yet the deliberate act of burying entire tents erased any notion of accident. Someone had orchestrated this, and the forest had hidden their work like a sealed vault. As forensic experts cataloged evidence, Emily dove into the dusty archives of old case files. What she found was startling. Back in 1981, other hikers had vanished along lesser-known sections of the Appalachian Trails, disappearances largely dismissed at the time as missteps or misreported sightings. One recurring name surfaced: Harlan Briggs, a reclusive woodsman rumored to haunt the mountains. Known for his eccentric behavior and uncanny familiarity with the terrain, Briggs had long existed more in folklore than in official records, yet his presence in local memory refused to be ignored. Meanwhile, the families of the missing were drawn back into the storm. Elaine Miller, now in her 70s, described her son Jonathan as adventurous but careful, a young man who calculated every risk before taking it. Thomas Hayes remembered Rebecca's devotion to mapping trails, her journals filled with detailed observations of every journey. These voices from the past were bittersweet, reminders of lives interrupted, but they also provided context. These were not careless hikers. Their habits might hold hidden clues about how they responded when danger struck. Then came a revelation from Angela's journals. Among her thoughtful entries lay sketches of unusual tracks, deep impressions, scattered in deliberate patterns across the soil. She described them almost as grids, geometric and unsettling. At the time, investigators dismissed them as overactive imagination, but Emily's team saw something far more sinister: a possible manipulation of the terrain itself, as though someone had engineered the environment to confuse or ensnare the group. The mystery deepened when faded photographs from Patrick O'Neill's collection resurfaced. In them, the campers laughed and posed along the slopes of Roan Mountain Ridge. Yet in one frame, just behind the tree line, lingered a shadowy figure. The image was grainy, but unmistakable enough to send a chill down every spine. They had not been alone. Someone had been watching. Authorities also revisited the collapsed cabin that locals had long whispered about. Beneath the rubble, a crawl space emerged, cluttered, with rusted camping gear and firewood arranged in patterns too intentional to be chance. Was this a temporary holding site, a decoy meant to mislead search parties, or something even darker? Emily began piecing together a chilling theory. If there was a perpetrator, they not only possessed mastery of the wilderness, but also a deep grasp of human behavior, anticipating each move the campers might make. Tension mounted within the investigative team. Some insisted that nature had simply swallowed the evidence, the shifting soils, the relentless growth of forest masking all traces. But the undeniable order of the buried tents told another story. From soil samples to the peculiar placement of belongings inside, everything pointed to careful orchestration, not random misfortune. As the investigation gained traction, the public added their own eerie accounts. Locals shared tales of flickering lights on forgotten trails, unexplained noises that drifted through the woods at night, and silent figures glimpsed slipping between trees. Whether superstition or truth, these stories fueled the growing sense that the Appalachian wilderness had been holding on to secrets far darker than anyone dared imagine. These unverified reports only deepened the dual image of the Appalachian wilderness, a place of breathtaking beauty shrouded in an undercurrent of menace, and gave new weight to the mystery surrounding the vanished campers. Emily Carter quickly realized that solving this case demanded more than forensics. It required stepping inside the mind of whoever had engineered such a precise and patient concealment. Every artifact unearthed, every testimony collected, even the way the forest itself was shaped, pointed to a predator hiding in plain sight, cloaked by decades of secrecy. Yet with each answer came new, unsettling questions. How could someone remain undetected for so long? Why target 9 young adults at once? And, most haunting of all, what happened to them after their tents were entombed beneath the soil? By late 2023, the investigation began revealing patterns that had slipped past earlier authorities. Soil samples from the buried tents contained traces of a rare mineral found only in a narrow band of the Appalachian foothills, proof that the tents hadn't originally been buried where they were discovered. This was not a crime of impulse, but one of methodical planning. Someone had moved the tents, carefully relocating them to evade detection over years, perhaps decades. New witnesses added chilling texture to the story. An elderly hunter, Tommy Hensley, remembered seeing the group on the ridge in 1981, apparently unaware of a man in dark clothing who slipped silently through the trees, blending with the shadows. He couldn't swear to the man's involvement, but the memory left a lasting chill. An unseen figure so at home in the terrain that he could vanish as easily as his victims. Emily's team also unearthed old communication logs from that year, long neglected in dusty archives. They described transient individuals camping near the same trails at the exact time of the disappearances. One entry mentioned a hermit-like man carrying shovels, ropes, and heavy tarps. Once dismissed as local rumor, these details now align disturbingly well with the buried tents, lending credibility to what had once been hearsay. For investigators, the picture was becoming stark. Someone had orchestrated the concealment of 9 people with precision, discipline, and a deep understanding of how to manipulate both the wilderness and human psychology. Inside the tents, forensic specialists found faint fingerprints on a handful of items, partial, degraded by time, but enough to suggest more than the campers had touched them. Angela's journal entries gained new significance. Her subtle notes about strange noises at night, unexplained footprints near their site, and missing personal items, initially brushed off as paranoia, now read like a warning. Piecing together the timeline, Emily reconstructed the group's final hours. On Friday evening, they arrived at a small clearing beside a stream, pitching tents and sharing laughter under the canopy of stars. By Saturday morning, anomalies began to appear. Unfamiliar footprints pressed into soft mud near the stream, gear slightly displaced, and the faint scent of smoke from an unseen fire lingering in the morning air. These overlooked signs painted a grim picture of a group under surveillance, perhaps even manipulated or lured by someone with meticulous intent. The investigation's reach extended beyond forensics, as local historians and amateur detectives began offering theories steeped in Appalachian folklore. Tales resurfaced of shadowy figures who haunted the mountains, preying on the unwary, blending myth with mystery. Whether legend or reality, the mounting evidence suggested the camper's disappearance was not a random tragedy, but the result of a long-laid plan hidden beneath the forest's quiet canopy. Speculation spread quickly through the small Appalachian towns. Some whispered about a serial predator who had turned the wilderness into his hunting ground, exploiting the isolation of the mountains to erase his crimes. Emily Carter stayed cautious, refusing to let folklore or fear distract her from hard evidence. Yet even she admitted the region's legend-like aura may have helped cloak whoever was responsible. The investigation shifted dramatically when early 1980s satellite imagery was compared with the tent sites. Hidden within the grainy images were signs investigators had missed for decades. Small clearings that shouldn't have been there, subtle disturbances in the earth, and narrow paths that appeared deliberately overgrown. The implication was chilling. Someone hadn't just hidden evidence, they had engineered the forest itself to mislead any searchers. Realizing this was no ordinary case, Emily brought in criminal profilers. Their assessment was unnerving. The perpetrator was patient, calculating, and deeply skilled in wilderness survival. This was someone with intimate knowledge of the Appalachian backcountry and the foresight to plan years, even decades, ahead. The question had shifted. It was no longer simply what happened, but rather, who could commit such a staggering crime and vanish undetected for over 40 years? Tension rippled through the nearby mountain towns as the silence of decades gave way to unsettling revelations. Families of the missing campers were torn between hope for closure and dread of what the truth might reveal. As investigators combed through the artifacts, they noticed something peculiar. Not everything was there. Cameras, journals, and other personal belongings had disappeared, as if someone had selectively chosen what the world could find, leaving behind just enough fragments to feed speculation but never resolve the whole mystery. For the families, each recovered piece was both precious and devastating. Clara Miller, sister of Jonathan Blake Miller, pored over the surviving journals, her heart breaking as she read Jonathan's meticulous terrain notes, Rebecca's artistic trail sketches, Sam's calm observations of wildlife, and Angela's increasingly uneasy entries about strange disturbances around the campsite. The journals painted a vivid portrait of 9 vibrant lives and the growing shadow that had encircled them. Emily began noticing connections that hinted at something larger. Soil evidence suggested the tents were buried using different methods, possibly indicating more than one perpetrator or a single person employing varying techniques to throw investigators off. Footprints near the original campsite didn't match the campers' shoes, but they also didn't consistently match each other, fueling theories of either decoys or multiple watchers in the forest. Even within the group itself, journals hinted at subtle disputes, minor disagreements about routes, leadership, and ignored warnings. On their own, they were insignificant, but together they may have made the group more vulnerable to exploitation by a careful observer. Rumors from the 1980s resurfaced as well. Locals recalled flickering lights wandering near Roan Mountain trails, sudden unexplained fires that burned briefly before vanishing, and unsettling encounters with a man hauling large sacks through the woods who always disappeared before anyone could approach. While anecdotal, these memories aligned with the idea of a predator who could slip between the trees like a phantom, watching unseen. Adding to the unease, forensic specialists uncovered faint traces of synthetic fibers in the soil around the buried tents, materials that didn't exist in 1981. This detail suggested that the crime scene had been manipulated long after the campers vanished, keeping the mystery alive, preserved, and unsolved. Emily Carter's theory took a darker turn. Someone had not only orchestrated the disappearance of the 9 campers, but had also returned to the scene decades later, tampering with evidence as if to tighten their hold over a deadly secret. This chilling realization suggested the perpetrator was still alive, a shadow in the present, perhaps still watching and capable of striking again. Fear rippled through the Appalachian communities. Trails once viewed as sanctuaries of solitude were now eyed with suspicion. Campgrounds installed surveillance cameras, hikers carried GPS trackers, and locals speculated that the predator had deliberately chosen these mountains because their vastness, folklore, and rugged beauty provided a perfect camouflage. As Emily dug deeper, she uncovered a terrifying pattern. Maps found among the campers' belongings revealed rarely used paths arranged almost ceremonially, routes the group had unknowingly followed as though guided by an invisible hand. When her team reconstructed the final hours of the trip, they identified subtle manipulations. Rocks shifted to create misleading markers, bent branches forming false trail indicators, and minor obstructions positioned to funnel the group into a chosen location. The evidence was clear. This was not random tragedy, but a predator's trap. Every new clue tightened the noose of suspense. Artifacts, witness accounts, and fragments of journals painted a narrative of patience and precision, forcing Emily to reconsider every assumption made since 1981. Someone had not only studied the terrain, but understood human behavior at an intimate level, orchestrating a scenario buried beneath decades of secrecy. The realization settled over the Appalachian Mountains like a heavy mist. The truth existed, but reaching it would demand courage, persistence, and an unflinching confrontation with darkness long hidden. Then came a discovery that shifted the investigation yet again. Soil from the buried tents contained faint traces of a slow-acting preservative unavailable to the public in 1981. Whoever sealed those tents underground had intended them to remain untouched for generations. This was not impulse or madness. It was the work of a mind playing the long game. A breakthrough arrived when digital restoration experts enhanced Patrick O'Neill's surviving photographs. Shadows and foliage, once obscured, revealed a figure previously overlooked, a person dressed in what resembled an old-style ranger uniform, complete with a makeshift badge. The implication was chilling. The perpetrator may have impersonated an authority figure or had insider knowledge of ranger operations, a disguise that would grant them mobility and trust in the wilderness without question. Meanwhile, the family struggled to process the surreal revelations. Thomas Hayes, Rebecca's father, returned to the Appalachian Trail for the first time in decades. To an untrained eye, the streams and clearings were ordinary, but to him they felt like a stage frozen in time. The buried tents a grim counterpoint to memories of his daughter's laughter. The orchestrated concealment had not only stolen lives, but warped decades of grief into something far darker. Emily's team also revisited Harlan Briggs, the aging woodsman whose name had appeared in local reports from 1981. Frail yet sharp, Briggs spoke cryptically of watchers in the forest, individuals who could manipulate nature itself, weaving observation and psychological control into a single skill. His words were laced with folklore and myth, but they offered context for the calculated nature of the crimes, a portrait of a predator who had mastered patience, camouflage, and the art of hiding in plain sight. And just as the team absorbed this possibility, new evidence surfaced, promising to push the investigation even deeper into the Appalachian shadows. When rangers unearthed an underground cache near the original campsite, the investigation took another chilling turn. Inside lay items once belonging to the missing campers, partially intact journals, a long-lost camera, and personal mementos, arranged with almost ceremonial precision. It was as though the perpetrator had been curating a private museum of his own crime, reliving it in miniature for decades. This obsessive preservation pointed to a singularly driven mind, someone who took pride not only in the concealment but in the manipulation of lives. Emily's team soon uncovered anomalies in the tent's placement that made the scene even more unsettling. The tents had been buried in a pattern mirroring astronomical alignments, the position of the sun, moon, and stars during the summer solstice of 1981. This revelation suggested the crime was more than practical concealment. It hinted at ritual, symbolism, perhaps even an obsession with perfection. This was no impulse, no sudden rage. It was a calculated, deliberate, and deeply ritualistic act. In the surrounding towns, the reaction was a mix of awe and fear. Hikers began reporting eerie coincidences, missing gear mysteriously reappearing, shadows flickering between trees, and the unshakable sense of being watched. Even seasoned outdoorsmen who had spent decades navigating the Appalachian wilderness confessed to feeling vulnerable, as though the mountains themselves were alive with secrets waiting to be uncovered. As Emily mapped the artifacts, witness statements, and historical sightings, a coherent yet terrifying picture began to emerge. The disappearance of the 9 campers was not random. It had been orchestrated with precision, patience, and an intimate grasp of both human behavior and wilderness psychology. Each clue pointed to one chilling conclusion. The perpetrator had intentionally hidden them, monitored them, and preserved the scene for decades, and might still be alive, watching. At this stage, the focus of the investigation shifted from reconstructing events to identifying the person capable of sustaining such long-term, meticulous control. The answers promised to challenge everything the community believed about the Appalachian Mountains and the darkness that could lurk within its remote corners. Tensions rose, not only among the grieving families but within Emily's own team, as each discovery opened more questions than it answered. The preservation of the tents, the deliberate placement of artifacts, and the cryptic astronomical alignments all revealed a perpetrator obsessed with control. For Emily, the challenge became as much psychological as forensic. To step inside the mind of someone who had orchestrated deception for 42 years. Interviews with locals provided further unsettling hints. Retired forest ranger Douglas Whitman recalled seeing a man moving stealthily near Roan Mountain Ridge in 1981, carrying a large canvas tarp. At the time, he had dismissed it as an ordinary hunter or camper. In light of the buried tents, he no longer believed that. It wasn't someone lost in the woods, Whitman said. It was deliberate, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Meanwhile, the recovered journals painted a subtle but disturbing portrait of the camper's final days. Angela Ruth Warren had written repeated notes about strange noises circling their camp at night, footsteps just beyond the tree line, and personal items shifted ever so slightly in ways that made no sense. What had once seemed like minor unease now read like a warning, a whisper from the past of a predator who had been watching all along. The fragments Emily Carter's team had once dismissed as minor now formed a chilling tapestry. The 9 campers had been monitored from the moment they set foot on the trail, their movements anticipated, their actions manipulated as if they were pieces on a board. For the families, the revelations were unbearable. Elaine Miller, Jonathan Blake Miller's mother, collapsed when she saw the photographs of the buried tents, her son's possessions sealed in earth like relics of a vanished world. His sister Clara pored over the recovered journals, desperate to decode hidden warnings or signals of how the group sensed danger. Each new discovery gave her hope and anguish at once, answers mixed with the horror of what those answers implied. Emily's team began to uncover a pattern even more disturbing. Soil samples showed that some tents had been moved or reburied at least twice, perhaps decades apart. The perpetrator had not only orchestrated the original disappearance, but returned to the scene over time, tending it like a private archive. This was more than concealment. It was an obsession spanning over 40 years. Among the most haunting finds was a small hand-carved box buried near the tent cluster. Inside were crude maps, sketches, and a diary written in a blend of shorthand and symbols. Analysis suggested it belonged to someone with encyclopedic knowledge of the Appalachian wilderness and a ritualistic fixation on the campers, as if the mountains were both stage and sanctuary, a realm the perpetrator controlled completely. The community became split between fascination and fear. Trails once busy fell silent as locals avoided areas now linked to the case. Hikers reported sudden chills, fleeting shadows darting between trees, and whispers carried on the wind. Superstitions once dismissed as folklore were being reconsidered in light of the investigation. Even seasoned outdoorsmen who had roamed the Appalachians for decades spoke of a new unease, the sensation of being watched in places they'd always felt safe. Emily and her team scoured historical records for anyone with the knowledge, obsession, and opportunity to engineer such a crime. Names like Harlan Briggs resurfaced, alongside old sightings of unknown figures haunting the trails in 1981. While the idea of a single mastermind seemed plausible, the evidence hinted at something larger, perhaps accomplices, or at least someone who had been studying the campers long before they vanished. As the team pieced together the timeline, one truth emerged with terrifying clarity. Every trail the campers walked, every campsite they chose, every seemingly free decision had been anticipated and manipulated. They had been drawn into a trap planned with extraordinary foresight and precision. Each recovered artifact, each blurred photograph, each whispered memory painted a portrait of a predator who had mastered patience, planning, and the psychology of fear. The Appalachian Mountains, once synonymous with beauty and adventure, had become a labyrinth of secrets where the line between wilderness and orchestrated horror blurred. Emily understood now that uncovering the perpetrator's identity meant more than closing a cold case. It meant confronting a mind that had hidden in plain sight for more than 4 decades, manipulating lives and memories with terrifying precision. The evidence was no longer just physical, it was psychological, historical, and deeply symbolic. The underground tents, carefully preserved for decades, were only the tip of the iceberg. Each artifact, each folded map, each shorthand note carried layers of meaning, an encrypted message from a predator who had built his crime as both a puzzle and a performance. The evidence no longer suggested mere concealment. It pointed to a deliberate, almost artistic attempt to craft a narrative only the perpetrator could truly understand. As Emily Carter sifted through the recovered journals, she saw a pattern emerge, subtle warnings embedded within the camper's own observations. Angela, Ruth Warren's sketches of the trails contained shapes that now resembled hidden markers. Rebecca Lynn Hayes had noted faint depressions in the soil, irregularities along the stream, small details dismissed at the time, but now starkly significant. These entries hinted that the group may have sensed they were being watched, even if they never grasped the full extent of the danger. Parallel to the forensic work, Emily's team plunged into historical records. They uncovered a string of unexplained disappearances along Appalachian trails in North Carolina and neighboring states in the years leading up to 1981. At the time, each case had been treated as an isolated incident, but together they revealed a disturbing pattern. Victims were often young, outdoor-oriented, and traveling in small groups. Methods of concealment echoed the same precision now seen in the 9 campers case, hinting at a predator who had been perfecting his methods for years. A breakthrough came when digital cartographers overlaid the original campsite locations with terrain data. The arrangement of the tents and the subtle disturbances in the earth aligned with natural choke points and hidden depressions. Whoever buried them knew the land's psychology as well as its topography, using the forest itself as a stage to direct every move while remaining invisible. Local lore began converging with the evidence. Hikers spoke of a hermit who had roamed the Roan Mountain area for years, vanishing from public view, but rumored to appear near remote trails, maintaining a network of small buried caches throughout the woods. Once dismissed as folklore, these stories now seem chillingly plausible. For the families, the revelations cut deep. Clara Miller, Jonathan's sister, meticulously examined recovered photos and journals, charting subtle consistencies, shadows at the edges, markings on rocks, paths that appeared too deliberate to be chance. Every small detail became a potential clue linking past to present. Thomas Hayes, Rebecca's father, scoured decades-old newspaper clippings, comparing early search reports with Emily's findings, desperate to understand how his daughter's life had intersected with a predator's plan. Emily herself began spotting anomalies in the recovered tents. A notebook placed squarely in the center, a pair of shoes aligned to a specific direction, remnants of food arranged with careful symmetry. These weren't random traces. They suggested someone had returned multiple times, not just to hide the scene, but to curate it, leaving it to be discovered on their terms. Forensic testing reinforced the horror. Chemical residues on the tent fabrics matched preservation methods from the late 20th century, techniques not widely known at the time. All of this pointed to a single unsettling conclusion. The disappearance of the 9 campers had never been a random act or a case of hikers lost in the wilderness. It was a meticulously orchestrated crime executed by someone who understood human behavior, terrain, and even time itself. Every movement, every observation, every artifact spoke of a patient, calculating mind of terrifying competence. The Appalachian Mountains, with their dense forests, hidden valleys, and mist-shrouded peaks, had become both a tomb and a stage. For Emily Carter, the challenge was no longer just about finding evidence. It was about unmasking a predator who had manipulated lives for decades, leaving clues designed to taunt but never reveal the full truth. Each discovery brought her closer to resolution, yet amplified the dread. If someone could orchestrate such precise concealment over 42 years, What other secrets might still lie hidden in these mountains? And as Emily pressed forward, one question weighed heavier with each passing week. Was the Watcher still out there, aware that their carefully constructed story was finally being unraveled? Late one evening, as Emily Carter sat in her temporary field office near Boone, reviewing the recovered photographs yet again, her eyes caught a detail she'd missed countless times before: a faint reflection in a pond near the original campsite. At first, it looked like nothing more than shadows, but enhancing the image revealed a shape too defined to dismiss. It was a figure, motionless, blending almost seamlessly with the forest's dark canopy, its outline betraying a human presence where none should have been. When the digital specialists sharpened the image further, a weathered face emerged from the foliage, partially obscured, older, and hauntingly real. For the first time, Emily and her team were staring into the eyes of someone who might have orchestrated the disappearance in person. The families, already living in the long shadow of this case, were drawn even deeper into the investigation. Clara Miller, Jonathan's sister, meticulously cross-referenced his notes with recovered sketches and journal entries. Within them, she found repeated, almost casual mentions of a watcher, vague descriptions of shadows, subtle movements, and sounds the group had initially dismissed as imagination or wildlife. Angela Ruth Warren's journal echoed similar observations, fragments that now read like a warning from the past. They had been watched, their every move anticipated. Emily returned to the abandoned cabin that locals had always whispered about, but investigators had largely ignored. Beneath layers of debris, she uncovered tools and materials matching the very soil and preservation traces found in the buried tents. Rope fibers, hand-carved stakes, and remnants of tarps suggested the cabin had been more than a shelter. It was a staging ground, a hidden workshop where the perpetrator planned and executed their actions with painstaking care. As forensic teams analyzed the cabin, Emily received a tip that reframed everything. Harlan Briggs, the enigmatic recluse long regarded as a harmless woodsman, had been seen moving with deliberate intent in the very forest surrounding the campers' trail during the early 1980s. Known for his survival skills and strange habits, Briggs had never been linked to any crime. But when Emily overlaid his known haunts with the locations of the buried tents and caches of artifacts, the pattern was undeniable. His name could no longer be dismissed as rumor. The tension spiked when new evidence emerged, signs that some of the tents had been disturbed in recent years. This wasn't a crime frozen in time. It was a living, evolving secret. Someone had returned, perhaps repeatedly, either to maintain control over their hidden archive or, more disturbingly, because they were still active, still out there. Recognizing the urgency, Emily launched a controlled stakeout at the burial site. Using surveillance equipment, night vision cameras, and motion sensors, her team began round-the-clock monitoring of the forest. The nights were long, cold, and unnervingly still. Only the rustle of leaves and the distant cries of wildlife broke the silence. Yet under that stillness lay the possibility of a predator who had outwitted everyone for over 4 decades, and might be closer than they imagined. Every rustle of the leaves, every crack of a twig in the dark turned the stakeout into a nerve-shredding vigil. Emily Carter and her team knew the predator could be close, but they didn't expect the silence to finally break that night. Through the night vision lenses, they saw him, a solitary figure moving with eerie precision through the underbrush, carrying tarps, stakes, and tools identical to those described in reports from 1981. He paused at the remnants of the old cabin, surveying the site with a ritualistic calm, as though checking on a stage he had curated for decades. It was the confirmation Emily had feared and anticipated in equal measure. The perpetrator was not a ghost of the past, but a living, breathing man still tending to his crime. The revelation was terrifying, yet clarifying. For the first time in 42 years, the predator had revealed himself. Emily now knew she was facing someone with an unparalleled mastery of the wilderness and a predator's intimate understanding of human psychology. This was no ordinary criminal. This was a manipulator who had built an entire mystery around himself, hiding in plain sight while controlling the narrative like an author who refused to finish his story. The Appalachian forest had been his cover, his stage, and his sanctuary. Emily recognized that confronting this person, unmasking his identity, understanding his twisted motivations, and finally uncovering what happened to the 9 campers would demand more than forensic skill. It required courage, strategy, and a willingness to peer into the darkest corners of human obsession. But now, with the perpetrator exposed, the hunt was shifting. Surveillance footage revealed that this figure returned repeatedly, performing deliberate rituals at the burial sites. His movements were precise, almost ceremonial, as though reasserting his control over the carefully preserved scene. Cross-referencing sightings, cabin locations, and soil disturbances, Emily's team uncovered a pattern. Every trail, every marker, every manipulation had been designed not only to entrap the campers, but to mislead future investigators. He had anticipated the search, even the investigation itself. Local accounts soon corroborated what Emily was seeing. Elderly hikers recalled a man from the early 1980s who appeared suddenly along remote trails and vanished just as quickly, his movements too fluid, too natural, as though the forest itself concealed him. One retired ranger, Douglas Whitman, described him as blending seamlessly into the trees, moving like the wilderness was part of his own body. Then came the most damning evidence yet. In the cabin's debris, Emily found a partially hidden journal, decades of entries written in meticulous handwriting. It contained maps of trails, campsite sketches, cryptic notes about watching the campers, and disturbing references to preserving the order of the forest. It wasn't just a diary, it was a blueprint of obsession, a private archive of the crime itself. Forensic experts matched fingerprints from the preserved tents and cabin materials to a name Emily had seen too many times: Harlan Briggs. For decades, Briggs had been dismissed as eccentric but harmless, a reclusive woodsman who lived off-grid in the Appalachian wilds. Yet the evidence now pointed directly at him as the mastermind behind one of the most haunting mysteries in American history. He had not simply hidden the campers. He had staged their disappearance with ritualistic care, burying their possessions in alignment with stars and soil, turning tragedy into a chilling performance meant to outlast generations. And now, at last, Emily Carter stood at the edge of his truth. The perpetrator, now unmasked as Harlan Briggs, had not only escaped justice for 42 years, but had done so with chilling foresight. He anticipated investigation methods, exploited the wilderness as both sanctuary and stage, and used his deep local knowledge to vanish into the very landscape he controlled. For him, the 9 campers were never victims of chance. They were unwilling participants in a long game of power, secrecy, and manipulation. Records revealed Briggs's lifelong obsession with wilderness survival and human psychology. He studied hikers, charted their habits, tracked their movements, and experimented with concealment as though preparing for this very crime. The hidden tunnels and caches, The astronomical alignments of the buried tents and the deliberate preservation of artifacts all pointed to a mind that thrived on secrecy and precision, crafting an invisible empire within the Appalachian woods. When Briggs's involvement became undeniable, families were finally given the truth they had been denied for decades. The relief was laced with heartbreak. While the campers' exact fates remained partly veiled, the mystery that had consumed generations was at last explained. Emotional reunions with journals, photographs, and small personal mementos gave families bittersweet fragments of closure, glimpses of laughter, love, and youth wrapped in the cruel knowledge of what had been taken from them. Emily Carter, after years of piecing together fragments, coordinated with law enforcement for Briggs's capture. Surveillance, patience, and careful strategy finally led to his arrest. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, the fingerprints, the journals, the caches, Briggs confessed with unsettling calm. His motives were not rage, nor even a singular moment of violence, but an obsessive desire to manipulate and control, to create a tableau where he remained unseen while his victims became part of a carefully curated wilderness performance. The Appalachian Mountains, once celebrated as a place of serene beauty and endless adventure, had harbored a predator in plain sight for over 4 decades. The buried tents, the ritual alignments, the journals, and the manipulated terrain stood as lasting testaments to a crime defined by patience, precision, and psychological mastery. With his confession, the 42-year-old mystery that had haunted North Carolina's communities finally reached its grim conclusion. Families, once suspended in endless uncertainty, could begin the long, painful journey toward closure. Seeing the recovered belongings was both healing and devastating. Tangible pieces of loved ones lost, preserved by the same meticulous cruelty that had erased them from the world. Emily oversaw the final cataloging of every item, ensuring that the evidence and story were documented in unprecedented detail. The investigation revealed a mind so methodical and obsessive that it blurred the line between crime and ritual. Briggs admitted that he had watched, manipulated, and buried the nine not out of passion, but out of an insatiable need for secrecy, dominance, and control over both nature and human life. The case left scars across the Appalachian region. For decades, the mountains had symbolized freedom and communion with nature. Now they stood as a reminder of the darkness that can hide within even the most beautiful landscapes. Local authorities responded by installing surveillance systems, expanding ranger patrols, and educating hikers about the dangers of isolation in the backcountry. Yet even as new measures brought safety, the story of the 9 campers endured, an echo through the ridges, a warning that in the silence of the wild, someone once turned beauty into a theater of horror. For the families of the 9 lost campers, healing came in small, tender gestures. They built personal shrines, returned journals and photographs to places of remembrance, and preserved fragments of a story that had once been swallowed by the mountains. Clara Miller, Jonathan's devoted sister, created a digital archive of his careful notes and trail sketches so that his meticulous observations would not vanish with time. Angela, Ruth Warren's writings were also collected and preserved, her courage shining through in her ability to notice and record the subtle anomalies that foreshadowed the danger. For Emily Carter, the resolution of the case was both a triumph and a burden. She had dismantled a 42-year-old mystery that had haunted entire communities, but the lingering weight of having glimpsed into the mind of a predator remained with her. The Appalachian Mountains had finally surrendered their secrets, yet vigilance remained essential. The case revealed an unsettling truth. Human ingenuity, when twisted by obsession, could manipulate even nature itself. Emily reflected on the lesson the case carried for everyone. Awareness, preparation, and resilience are as critical in the wilderness as they are in life. The tragedy of the nine campers underscored both the fragility of human existence in remote places and the frightening lengths to which some individuals will go to exert control. By studying evidence, by remembering the past, and by staying vigilant, future tragedies might be mitigated, even if they cannot always be entirely prevented. As the investigation reached its end, the community honored the memory of the campers with memorials and storytelling. Along the trails where they had once walked, informational plaques were placed, telling hikers not only of the beauty of the Appalachians, but also of the cautionary tale of the vanished nine. Though trauma could never be erased, the story became a testament to resilience, to perseverance, and to the unrelenting pursuit of truth. And for you watching today, this case serves as a powerful reminder of the extraordinary lengths investigators will go to uncover hidden truths, the importance of keeping cold cases alive until justice is found, and the resilience of families who endure decades of unanswered questions. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and like this video to support our work. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, whether your community holds its own unsolved mysteries, and stay tuned for the next story where we continue to bring light into the shadows. 42 years ago, 9 friends set out for a simple weekend camping trip in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, and they were never seen again. Search teams scoured the ridges, rivers, and caves, but not a single clue surfaced. For decades, their disappearance became a ghost story whispered around campfires until rangers uncovered something hidden beneath the soil that changed everything. What they found wasn't just evidence. It was a chilling revelation that suggested someone had orchestrated the entire disappearance with terrifying precision. Before we dive into this shocking case, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy true mysteries like this one, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story.